My name is Maida Knapton, and this is Series 2 of Mapping with Maida, where I'll be teaching you all about do-it-yourself ranch mapping and Google applications. The goal of this series is to introduce you to free mapping tools that allow you to create, save, and share maps of your ranch based on your needs. We will be diving into the basics of map making and going over examples of how you can utilize tools to meet your mapping needs. And if you don't know what your mapping needs are yet or are looking for more ideas, this class will give you an overview of how you can integrate maps into your ranching operation. And again, I want to emphasize that there's no mapping experience needed to participate in this class. I built this class at the beginner level, so we're really starting from square one. So RSA is hosting this class, the Rancher Stewardship Alliance, is hosting this class because we've had requests from producers and land managers to provide education tutorials on mapping tools that can directly support a ranching operation. That being the need that was identified, the curriculum in these series are tailored to producers and land managers. And another reminder, there's no prior mapping experience needed. The series is designed for beginners, and all tools and services covered are open source, completely free, and best accessed on a computer. So tablets really aren't recommended. And I have a PDF version of this video, and it includes links, narrative information, pictures, and descriptions of where buttons are, and additional details if you're more of a word person rather than a picture person. And the videos and PDFs exist, so there's really no pressure to have everything memorized now, and create a resource that you can come back to, which is kind of like as an additional learning resource that is tailored to those different learning styles. So, a little bit about me. My name is Maida Knapton, and I'm the mapping specialist here at the Rancher Stewardship Alliance. For those that joined me for session 1, you might find a couple of these slides familiar, but I promise I'll be giving a high-level overview. A little bit about me. I grew up in rural Montana, where from a young age I grew very passionate about our landscapes and communities. I've been working for the Rancher Stewardship Alliance since May of 2024, and at RSA I provide producer technical assistance and mapping education, like this virtual classroom. So that being said, I really want to emphasize that my background and specialty is in mapping, GIS, and environmental science. If I can't answer a particular question that you're looking for, we'll make sure to get it to somebody who can, or just feel free to email me with my email on this slide right here, and I'll make sure to get it to somebody who can. Here's our schedule for our learning video today. I'm going to give an introduction to the Rancher Stewardship Alliance for those who don't know us, and our acronym is RSA, so you might hear me throw that out a couple times. Then we're going to dive into the basics of map making and how to make a good map, and then we'll jump into an introduction to Google My Maps, which will be our first mapping tool that we're going to cover. And then after that, we're going to go into Google Earth Pro, which will be our second mapping tool that we're going to cover. And then we're going to talk about importing the maps you make in Google Earth Pro and Google My Maps into other applications. And then I'm going to be giving you guys some additional resources, some mapping resources that I like to use, and I know that some of the producers that I work with in our area really like to use. So finally, I'm going to give a little overview of Mapping with Maida Series 3, which this is going to be hosted virtually on January 20th. So I'm going to be presenting information in this presentation format, and I'll also be sharing my screen when we navigate through the map making tools. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Rancher Stewardship Alliance, and I'll give a little background about our organization. So in 2003, with the desire to keep the grasslands of the Northern Great Plains intact and its producers flourishing, 30-plus ranch families joined together to form the Rancher Stewardship Alliance, or RSA. As an organization, the Rancher Stewardship Alliance exists to help multi-generational and beginning ranchers build the collaborative, trusting relationships and community-based solutions we need to create healthy working landscapes and vibrant rural communities. So our core mission is founded around supporting ranching, conservation, and communities, and we really believe that these three add up to a winning team. So this is our board of directors as of January 2026, and we are rancher founded and rancher led, and our president is Connie French. At RSA, we are a staff of 7, with our executive director being Angel DeVries. And at the Rancher Stewardship Alliance, Our work has long been grounded in conservation and education. Supporting ranchers through learning opportunities they identify as important, and by helping fund projects that strengthen ranch opportunities while sustaining wildlife habitat. Community building really grows naturally from this work, and as conservation and education efforts move forward, they bring together the people that are meant to serve, creating communities of ranchers, conservation professionals, and those who work in the intersection connected by shared values and mutual support. Rural resiliency is kind of a direct outcome, and so agriculture is Montana's #1 industry and really the backbone of rural communities, and by supporting ranchers in ways that both benefit working lands and the wildlife habitat, we can help strengthen the stability and resiliency of these communities. And so our last program here is the Mapping and GIS program, which emerged directly from rancher needs and now supports and connects kind of all of this work. So enhancing conservation, education, community building, and rural resiliency. For this series on DIY ranch mapping, I'll be using a ranch called the Webb property for my examples. The Webb Ranch is a property that RSA will be utilizing for a shared access, grazing, and mentorship opportunity, hopefully starting in 2027. And this really is a great example for DIY ranch mapping. And you'll notice that this property is up on the US and Canadian border, just north of Malta, Montana. Now that I've talked a little bit about our organization, we'll be jumping into the mapping basics. And for this series, we're going to go over the basics of making maps. And here we'll talk about different ways to represent features on the ground, with the end goal being making maps to aid in communication efforts. So I really want to paint the big picture before we jump into the how-tos, just so you guys get an idea of what our end goal is going to be. So the need we've identified here is that we want good ranch infrastructure maps to enhance our communication. So based on our end goal for this webinar, we'll be focusing on creating ranch infrastructure maps in Google applications. And this means we'll be making maps that represent fence lines, water systems, and give details of what actually is on the landscape. The maps that we make in this series can be used in conjunction with the stocking and vegetation maps we went over in Series 1, and I'll talk a little bit about how that works. So, that being said, we will not be working on mapping ownership, answering any legal questions, or diving into any sort of resource management spatial analysis. But I will be making additional mapping recommendations at the end of this presentation to give resources to help answer any additional questions that I'm not going to cover. So I'm going to show you guys what Google My Maps looks like here. So this is the Google My Maps interface, and this is the Webb property. So on here I have my pastures mapped, I have my gates mapped, my pipelines, and all of my tanks mapped on here. And this interface is interactive, so you can zoom in, you can click on different pastures, you can click on different water features, and you can change the base map around so that it is in satellite. This is kind of the end goal for our ranch map in Google My Maps. The next thing that we're going to look at is going to be Google Earth Pro, and we're going to be looking at the same ranch map in Google Earth Pro. So this is the Google Earth Pro application with all of the ranch map information on here as well. So we have our same pastures, pipelines, fence lines, gates. It just is going to look a little bit different than Google My Maps. So recognizing that role of maps and ranching operations being mostly utilized as a communication tool, I've really picked two mapping applications to teach you all how to make these maps in, and that was that Google My Maps and Google Earth Pro that I just showed, which are both free applications. And the great thing about building maps in Google applications is that you can easily save, export, and share these maps to others to serve that communication need. So the two images on this slide are ranch infrastructure maps for the Webb property that I just showed that I built in Google Earth Pro and Google My Maps. And the goal with highlighting two map making tools is so that you can pick which one works the best for you, as they are slightly different in some of their mapping tools that they provide. And I've made many ranch infrastructure maps, and I most commonly use points, lines, and polygons to represent the real features of what's on the ground. So the combination of points, lines, and polygons on background base maps like satellite imagery, so this is the satellite imagery over here, are what really make a good ranch map. And this is kind of what I call an A+ ranch map. So, for example, in these two images, I use polygons to represent my pastures, I use points to represent my gates and stock tanks, and I use lines to represent my pipelines. So, if points, lines, and polygons on a base map are the backbone of a good ranch infrastructure map, this is really where we're going to start. So we talked about this a bit in Series 1, but we often use points, lines, and polygons to represent features that we see on the ground. And depending on what you're trying to represent, this will determine whether you use a point, line, or polygon. And background-based maps help you to navigate and orient yourself when you're making your maps. And satellite imagery, I believe, can be one of the most useful base maps when creating your ranch maps because you can actually see what's on the ground. And it acts as a really good reference point. So I'm going to give some examples of how I use points, lines, and polygons. So points are useful for representing a singular location, especially if you're wanting to represent a specific location such as a tank, gate, cattle guard, well, or creek crossing, because a singular point contains latitude and longitude information. And a point can really help you answer questions like, where is that one gate? So lines, on the other hand, can be great for representing linear features such as roads, streams, pipelines, boundaries, and fences. Lines can tell you the length of a feature, and lines can help you answer questions like approximately how many feet of pipeline do I need to water this other side of the pasture here. And then our final one are polygons. And polygons are great for representing areas such as allotments and pastures. Polygons can tell you the area of a feature and help you answer questions like how many acres is in an allotment or in a pasture, or what is the total acreage of the operation that I run on. So next we're going to talk about map layers. And map layers are really essential to organizing information. And we can think of a map layer as like a folder or a book that holds the same kind of map features. And each layer can contain points, lines, or polygons, and all of them belong together. And so this is an example. I'm showing one of my map layers, which contains all of my pastures that I've drawn from my ranch. And I can refer to this as my pasture layer. So you can see I have all of these different pastures here that are colored differently, and you can see the associated names that are here held in that map layer. So you can create multiple layers that contain points, lines, and polygons. So this is an image of Google My Maps, and I have a window, so this window over here, containing all of my pasture polygons, a layer for my gates, for my pipelines, and my tanks. And these are all map layers. And the benefit of layers is that you can save them as files and share them into other applications. So if I was working in Google My Maps and I want to export my pasture layer to then use in StockSmart or the rangeland analysis platform, I would be able to do that. And the benefit of being able to share these layers into other applications is that this is how we can get the information that's in your brain shared to other people, besides just the classic point and wave or yell strategy, which no shame, but I feel like this way might work a little bit better sometimes, but I'll leave that up for your guys' interpretation. So we can take our map layers and then we can turn them into files. And a mapping file is a specialized digital file that stores a map layer. So for example, this is my pasture layer, including it would store our information for these pastures, and it links data to points, lines, and polygons to specific locations on our Earth. So there are 3 common mapping file types that you will all likely see. And we talked a little bit about this when we went over the stocking rate tools, but really the 2 Google files are the ones that we're going to be working with today are called KMZs and KMLs. And you will also additionally see this icon over here. It's called a shape file, which is an Esri file. And Esri is just another mapping platform like Google, but it unfortunately is not free like Google, and that's why we're not using it today. So that being said, today we will be working just with those KMZs and the KML files, but I can always go into additional details about shapefiles as they are extremely common in the mapping world and almost more common than the KMZ and KML files. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. So next we're going to talk a little bit about storing these files. And a spatial file such as a KMZ or a KML or a shape file containing your data, so your points, lines, and polygons, can be stored on your device or in a cloud-based application such as OneDrive or Google Drive. And really the benefit of this is that you can then send these files to others so that they can have the pasture lines or gates you created on their phone or computer. And this can be super helpful when communicating with consultants, government agencies, or other team members. So these are 2 KMZ files, or KML and KMZ files here that I stored in my file system. This is just a screenshot, and this is kind of what they look like. They had this little Google Pro icon on the side, and that's pretty typical of these KMZ or KML files. So people store their files in their file system in many ways. I feel like I've seen it all. But sometimes it's organized, and sometimes the organizational strategy is that there is not one. But for folks that are interested, I thought I would give an example of how I store and specifically organize mine. We talked about storing mapping files on your device, such as your computer hard drive, or in a cloud-based application such as Google Drive or OneDrive. And this organizational strategy, the one that I have outlined on this presentation slide, works the same across all of these. And if there's any confusion about what storing files means on your local device or on a cloud-based application, make sure you come to the January 20th Q&A with Mapping with Maida Series 3. And I'm really happy to talk more about this and go into more detail. So, one thing that I want to point out here is that I use an underscore in the names of my mapping files. Sometimes mapping applications can't read spaces, so I utilize underscores often as a risk mitigator, I like to call it. So I just wanted to throw that little note in here before we talk about the organizational strategy of my file system. So my example, my organizational structure for my file system is I find it extremely important to have a structure that I can easily find what I need. And to do this, I utilize folders in a naming system. And you can see here that I'm keeping all of the mapping related information in a series of folders. And the first folder, or the yellow folder here, contains all the mapping information related to the homestead property, or like, for example, my example ranch. And then within this yellow folder, I have a series of 3 more folders. And the red folder is going to contain all of my mapping files or my data. So I have it labeled homestead map data. And within here, I have those KML and KMZ files. So the blue folder contains all of my documents that are associated with this homestead property. So this would include PDFs, any Word documents that contain any spatial related things, or map layouts. And then the green folder is where I keep all of my drone data, since I use a drone often. So anytime I go out onto the property and take videos or photos, I'll put it inside this homestead drone data folder. We've gone over the mapping basics, and next we're going to jump into Google My Maps, which is going to be the first mapping tool that we're going to go over today. So Google My Maps is an online mapping tool that can be accessed with a free Google account and a quick Google search. When using Google My Maps, I really recommend working in the Google search engine because sometimes these applications can kind of play favorites and it works better in its own browser. So we're going to move online next. I'm just going to open my browser here and search Google My Maps. So I already have a Google account. This is my Google account here. I'm signed in. And since I'm signed into my Google account, I'm just going to click Google My Maps. And so this will take you to the home page of Google My Maps. And what you want to do, I have 3 maps that are already in here, but yours will look blank if you haven't made a map on Google My Maps before. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click the Create a New Map button. And so this will basically start a new project, and it'll save all of the information that you create in your project to your Google Drive. So you just hit this Create button, and it'll open you to the interface here. And quickly, before we start drawing our polygons and making our ranch map, I want to talk about why Google My Maps is unique. And there's 2 things here, but Google My Maps really allows you to share your maps with others real time by inviting users to collaborate or view a project. So right now I'm in a project, but you can basically add other users to collaborate in this project that you're working on. And then the other thing about Google My Maps is the map layers. So this is going to be our layers over here. Contains points, lines, and polygons. You can make these and you can export these and share them. And then you can also import additional KMZ. So if you have a KMZ file, you don't want to redraw everything, you can import that into here. So that's a little of the 2 unique things that I just wanted to talk about first before we start diving into the tutorial here. But the first thing that I want you guys to start with when you come into this mapping interface is to just label the name of your map. And you can add a little bit of a description too. So we're going to be mapping the web homestead. And so I'm just going to call this homestead ranch map. And then you can put a little description in here, and what this description will do is that if you share this map with anyone, they'll be able to see your description. So this is going to be an infrastructure map for the web property. So I'm just going to call it that, and then I'm going to say that this was created in January of 2025. Or 2026. 2026, just so that people know when I started making this map, and then I'm going to click Save. And so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change my base map here to satellite imagery because it's a lot easier for me to see where I'm going and what I'm mapping when I can actually see what's on the ground. So again, I'm going to be zooming into an area that is in eastern Montana, right up on the border of Canada here, and this is where we're going to start making our ranch map. So if you had parcels of your place in a KMZ or KML format, you can import those into here, and then you can see what parcels you'll be working with in reference to when you're drawing your infrastructure maps. So the first thing that I kind of want to go over here is how to draw fence lines. That's the first thing that I'm going to be starting with today. So this is our home property here, and to draw fence lines here, we're going to want to put these into a layer. And so this untitled layer here, I'm going to rename this to pastures. And then in here, I'm going to start drawing. So since this is my only layer that I have on right now, if I start drawing a polygon, and this just says a line, but if you close the line, it'll turn into a polygon. It'll show up in my pastures layer. So I'm going to click this Draw a Line button, add or line or shape, that's fine. And I'm going to just start drawing here. So I'm going to go to my fence line, and go all the way around my pasture. I'm just going to follow the vertexes here. And mine's not going to be perfect, but you guys can zoom in and make it as accurate as perfect as you want. So right now I'm just drawing a line, but if I go to my end point or where I started and close my line and turn it into a polygon, then it'll turn it into a polygon. So I'm just going to call this home pasture or home place. And you can write a little description here. You can add a picture if you want, but for now I'm just going to call this home place and then click save. And so what that does is it closes this line and turns it into a polygon, and then you can get acreage calculations and a perimeter calculation from it as well. So I'm going to draw 2 more pastures just so you guys can get an idea of how this works. But the pasture I just drew is now showing up in my pastures layer. So I'm going to draw a couple more pastures in here, and then we're going to move on. So this is my next pasture, closing my line to a polygon. We're going to call this cattle trap. And then again, it gives you your acreage and your perimeter. And then it shows up here in your pastures layer. So I'm going to do maybe one more little area here. So I'm going to extend this pasture, say that this comes down here. I'm kind of making a made up pasture right now, but just so you guys get an idea. And I'm going to call this south. So again, it gives me my acreage calculation and my perimeter in miles. And so what I can do now is now I have 3 pastures, and you can see them show up here in my layers pane. And what I can do is I can symbolize these or change the style to different colors. And to do this, it is going to ask you how you want to basically color your polygons, and you can do it by selecting by individual styles or uniform styles. So if I want my polygons to all be one color, I can click this uniform style. It's just going to categorize all items to be one color. But if I want my polygons to be colored by their different names, then I can click this style by data column name, and it'll change the colors on my pastures to unique values here. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is we used StockSmart to calculate different stocking rates for our pasture. And if you wanted to, there's an associated data table with each layer, and I'll show you what I mean here. But if you click pastures, then you click open data table, it'll give you a data table for your pasture. So you can add additional information in here. So if you wanted to put a description for the home place, for cattle trap, or for a south pasture, you can do that in here. But if I wanted to add another column, let's say that I want it to be representing, because I want to put my AUMs and have my AUMs associated with those pastures, I can hit new column and then type AUM in here, and you want to keep the type as text. So basically what's it's asking, it's asking what type of information is going to be in these rows. If it's going to be a text, if it's going to be a number, if it's going to be date and time, or true and false, and we want to keep it as text. That seems to be the easiest because you can put numbers in as text as well, in addition to characters. So then you can click add, and then it'll put your AUMs in here, and you can add your AUMs in here by clicking, and then it'll automatically save it so you can exit out of here. If you want to put pictures in here, you can do that as well. If you need to edit your pastures, you can click on your pasture here and click this edit tab, and you can click on and off your descriptions and your AUMs, and then you can also move these vertexes around too. So if I cut my pasture too short, you can go back and edit those, which is pretty nice. And then you can click save, and that's kind of a description of how you can draw your pasture polygons in Google My Maps. And if we wanted to, say, draw our stock tanks on here too, what we would go and do is we want to add another layer, And what this will do is pull another layer down here where we can start drawing more features. So I'm going to call this my tank layer. I'm going to click save. And then if you see this blue bar right here, that means if I start adding points, which are my points up here, it's going to add them into this layer that I have selected on right now. So I'm going to add some tanks onto this property here. So there's a tank here, and I'm going to call this is an insulated tank, so I'm going to call this a winter tank. And click save. So what that'll do is then it'll save your description or your name of your point into your layers area here. So I'm going to add another point because I have a stock tank that's over here on this side of my pasture, and this one's just a summer tank, so I'm going to label that summer, or just tank. Tank, save, and then I have one more tank down here at the bottom of my pasture, and I'm going to label this tank since this one is also a summer tank. And so whenever you create these points, like I said, points are great because they give you exact locations. This gives you your latitude and longitude for that point or that tank location, which is kind of nice if you wanted to be super specific about where you want somebody to go. You can send them these latitude and longitude coordinates, or they can have this information on their phone. So that's a little bit about drawing points and polygons. And then if we wanted to draw a line, I'm going to say that I want to map my pipeline here. I'm going to add a layer, and then you can say, I'm going to title this layer pipeline, and then you can start drawing again. So I have a well that is over here in this area of the property, and I know my pipeline goes, this is going to be a rough estimate. You guys can kind of see the pipeline actually here, but it's going to be a rough estimate. So there's my pipeline. And you can put, oops, well, I need to edit this. The back window accidentally closed. Pipeline. And then in here, if you wanted to add a description of your pipeline, of like what type of casing you're using, how far it's buried, if it's above ground or if it's below ground, or what well it's attached to, you can do that here. And then you can click save. And then the next thing that you can do is you can edit the color and the size of your line. So let's do that really quick, just so we can show you guys an example of how to do that. There's this little like color tab over here, and if you click on this, you can change the color. So to me, the most intuitive thing is going to be a blue for pipeline. So I'm going to change my pipeline color to blue, and then the pipeline is a little too small for me to see, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger by enhancing this line width. So that's a way that you can change the color and size of your features here. And then let's do that for the same thing for these winter tanks over here. I'm going to say that I want these tanks to have labels on them so I can show people which tanks are winter and which ones are just regular tanks without actually having to point them out on the map. And to do that, I'm going to label my class by name. And so I'm going to hit the label button and then click name. And so what it'll do is it'll pop these labels up onto my map so that you can get an idea of where are my winter tanks and where are my summer tanks without even me telling you where they are. So that's kind of an overview of how you can draw your points, lines, and polygons, and how you can symbolize them or color them based on your needs, and change the diameter of things, the icons. Yeah, the other thing you can do too is you can change the icons too. So if you'd rather have something else representing your tank, you can go down here and search for things, and yeah, all that sort of thing. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about here is how we can then export these features and save them. So on my computer, I like to use OneDrive, so I'm going to be saving these layers that I created as KMZs to my OneDrive folder. And to do that, we're going to have to save each individual layer. And it's pretty easy to do, but you just go over to this, say I want to export my pastures layer here. I'm going to go to my layer options, or this 3 dots, and I'm going to say export data. And I want to export data as a KML or a KMZ file. So I'm going to export to KML, KMZ file, and I'm going to click this export as KML instead of KMZ. And then you can click download, and what it's going to do is it's going to download it to your browser here. And it also shows up in your downloads on your computer. And then I'm just gonna pull up my my OneDrive here quickly and give you guys an example of how I can pull this layer and save it into my OneDrive with that file system that I was recommending. So I have my homestead, so I'm in my data page here. I have my homestead maps. This is my main folder where all of the maps related to my homestead are going to go. And then in this folder, if I double click it here, it'll open up to the homestead map PDFs and a homestead map data. And since this is a data file, I'm going to click homestead map data in here, and I'm going to need to minimize my screen here so it doesn't go all over the place. But what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to take this downloads and put it into my folder that I just had open here, so hopefully you guys can see that. Hold on just a second. I need to make this a little bit smaller. This is kind of how I like to do things, is drag and drop, but there's other ways to do this too if you prefer. So I just dragged my pastures from my downloads into my file system here, and so then this KML of the pastures that I just created is going to be saved into my file system. So let's go back to our presentation here. All right, so we just did an overview of Google My Maps, and now we are going to jump into Google Earth Pro. So Google Earth Pro is a desktop application. And what that means is that unlike Google My Maps, which runs in a web browser, Google Earth Pro is installed on your computer as an application. So like you have apps on your phone, Google Earth Pro is basically an app on your computer. The application is free and there's no account needed to utilize the application or download it. And then the application can be downloaded from Google's official Google Earth Pro download page and installed like any other desktop software. There are some requirements that your computer must have to run Google Earth Pro, and I outlined those in the learning document for Series 2, but you could also find that with a quick Google search. But once installed, Google Earth Pro can be launched from your computer rather than a browser. And I always want to caution people when they are downloading applications onto their devices to always download things directly from the application's official site. So I'm going to take us to the application's official site so I can show you where to download Google Earth Pro, and then we'll actually jump into how to use the application. So we're going to jump to our browser here. I'm going to open up my browser, and I'm going to type into my browser Google Earth Pro download. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take you to the overview page of how to download Google Earth Pro. And Google Earth Pro is available as a website and also as a desktop application. And I would recommend downloading the desktop application because there's a few other tools that the desktop application offers that the online version doesn't. So I'm going to go to the official Google website to download Google Earth Pro. And you can see that there's a Google Earth on web, Google Earth on mobile, and then Google Earth Pro on desktop, and that's the one that we want. So I'm going to click Google Earth Pro on desktop. And so again, make sure you check your computer requirements. Make sure you have enough storage to download this application. But you can download Google Earth Pro on PC, Mac, or Windows application. There's a lot of different ways, different types of computers you can download Google Earth Pro on. And then you just click this download Google Earth Pro on desktop, and it'll walk you through how to get that onto your computer. So that being said, I already have Google Earth Pro downloaded on my computer, so I'm just going to launch Google Earth Pro, and we are going to start to go through the tutorial for Google Earth Pro, similar to what we did for My Maps. So I've just launched my Google Earth Pro here, and it's gonna pop up with this information window, and you can just close out of this if you would like. So the interface is kind of similar to Google My Maps, where we have a lot of the tool windows on the left-hand side of our screen, and then we have our mapping interface here in the middle. I'm gonna get us to our ranch that we're gonna be using as our example, so that web property. Take us to our web property up in northeastern Montana. So the one thing that I want to highlight here is to talk a little bit about the difference between Google Earth Pro and Google My Maps. So in Google Earth Pro, in addition to using points, lines, and polygons to create your infrastructure map, Google Earth Pro also provides satellite imagery, 3D terrain, historical imagery, and advanced measurement and mapping tools, which can really allow for more detailed spatial visualization, especially if you're wanting to plan out new infrastructure, if you're looking for elevation information, if you're going to put a new fence line in or put a new pipeline in. Google Earth Pro can do a pretty good job of helping you with some of those mapping needs. The differences between Google Earth Pro and Google My Maps is that the application for Google Earth Pro is free, and there's no account needed to utilize the application. So Google My Maps, you have to have a Google account to utilize the application, but since Google Earth Pro is a desktop application, you don't necessarily need to create an account. So Google Earth Pro does not support real-time collaboration like Google My Maps, but your map layers, your map layers containing your points, lines, or polygons, can be saved and shared as KML files. And additionally, you can also import map layers, including those shape files like we talked about beforehand. So that's kind of the nice thing about Google Earth Pro, and also some of the cons of Google Earth Pro. So similar to our Google My Maps tutorial, I'm gonna give an overview of the home page and what all these buttons mean first, and we're gonna basically orient ourselves with this application, and then we're gonna draw our ranch map, and then we're gonna export our layers. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is kind of these two windows on the side. So we have this places windows and we have this layers window. In our places window, this is where we're going to save all of our map layers that are going to contain our points, our lines, and our polygons. And then down here, which is a little counterintuitive, this layers area is where you can click on and off some of the different base map options that are here. So if I want roads on my base map here, I've got roads selected on my base map. But if I don't want those, I can click those off. So I'm going to leave those on and off, and it'll help with orienting yourself around because it gives you a borders and label option here too. So that's a little bit of the difference between the places and the layers page up here. Additionally, we have a toolbar at the top where you can import information. There's printing options, which that's the nice thing about Google Earth Pro is you can actually print PDF maps, unlike Google My Maps. I mean, you can take a screenshot on Google My Maps, but on Google Earth Pro, there's actually a print option. And then there's these other toolbars up here that you can go through and look through some of the different options. Like there's a latitude and longitude grid system if you want to put that on there. And you can click those on and off by selecting the icon windows here. And then this tools bar too includes some different mapping tools that you might be interested in, but those also show up here in our icons that are on the bar up on the top here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to kind of organize our map by creating our map layers. So I'm going to go to My Places, and if you right click, you can click Add, and I'm going to add a folder. And I'm going to call this my pastures folder, so that any pasture lines I make, I can save into this pastures folder. So now that I created this pastures folder, I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to click Add, and it'll ask you if you want to add another folder or if you want to add a point line or polygon. And so I'm going to start with my polygons here. So this is my polygon window. I'm going to map the same things that we just did in Google My Maps. So I'm going to zoom into my area here. And I'm going to name my polygon here. This first one I made is going to be called Home Place. Home Place. And so in here you can write a description of your home place. You can style your polygon color if you want. I want it to just be outlined. I don't want my polygon to be filled here, so I'm going to select under area outlined. And then it will give you some options for under the view tab, and there's some information of like how your line sits on the ground. This is kind of what this is talking about here. And then it's going to ask you what type of measurements you want when it creates this polygon. So if you want your perimeter in miles, you set that to miles. Or if you want it in, say you want your perimeter in feet, so you know how many feet of fence you have for that pasture. I want my area in acres. And then don't click OK, because you want to draw your polygon first and then click OK. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to draw my polygon here. And then to end your polygon, you just want to double click with your mouse and then click OK. And so that's my first polygon that I've drawn here. And to add another one, I'm going to go up to the Add tab, Polygon. This one's called Cattle Trap. And then I'm going to draw my cattle trap pasture here. And then click OK. And then last pasture here, polygon. This one is called South. And then I'm going to draw my south pasture here. And then click OK. So those are my 3 pastures. And again, if you wanted to change the color or add any more information, you can click on these polygons that you've drawn in here, and then you can just click properties, and then that'll take you back to this edit tab where you can write a description. So unlike Google My Maps, there's no like table in here, but you can then, if you wanted to add AUMs, you can add AUMs here in the description. Oops, I changed the name on accident. What was this one called? This one was called Cattle Trap. But you can go to the description and you can write AUMs in here, or if the last grazed, or something like that. You can add that information in here, and when you click OK, then that information will show up in your layers tab here. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add another folder, and I am going to call this my tanks folder. And you can add a description if you want, but I'm not going to. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to add a place mark, which is the same thing as a point. I'm going to add a place mark here, and you can change the icon. It always comes out with this push pin, and I don't always love that, so you can change it to say something else here. I'm going to hit OK, and this one is going to be called my, I'm going to put this as my winter tank here, so this is going to be called my winter tank. I'm going to hit OK. There's my winter tank, and then I'm going to do the same thing again. You guys kind of get the idea of how to do this now at this point, so I'm just going to do one more tank on here. And then again, your latitude and longitude is going to show up. This is in degrees, minutes, seconds, which is just another way to represent latitude and longitude. But you can also change that as well. And then I'm going to hit OK here. And so I have my 2 tanks. And then the last thing that I'm going to add in here is my pipeline. So instead of a line, it's called a path. Or let's do this again. I need to add a folder first. I'm getting ahead of myself. So pipeline. I'm going to click OK. Got my folder, my pipeline folder showing up here. I'm going to add a path. So this is going to be our line here. This is going to be called pipeline. and then I'm going to start drawing my pipeline here off of my well. So once I get done drawing this, you can change the color again, all that sort of thing, put a description in. You can get your measurements in feet, or if you want it in miles, preferred in miles, you can do the same thing and then hit OK. And so that's kind of how you draw and symbolize your points, lines, and polygons in Google Earth Pro. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the cool features that Google Earth Pro has that Google My Maps doesn't have. And then we're going to talk about how we can export our pastures and our tanks and our pipelines and save them as KMLs into our file system. The first tool that I want to talk about is the measurement tool. So if you go up to your tool bar at the top and you click this show ruler icon, it'll pop up with this window, and there's a couple of different options here. So there's a line measurement that you can look at, there's a path, polygon, circle, there's a 3D path, so this will take into account different elevation profiles in this final length metric, and a 3D polygon, which will also take into account those ups and downs in the landscape in its final metrics. But I want to talk about this path ruler option here and make sure that your show elevation profile is on, because it can be a good tool when you're planning different infrastructure projects, or if you want to look at the elevation profile of an area. So I have a well that starts right here, and say that I want to put in a new pipeline and get a tank in this other side of my pasture. I can draw this area or I can draw this line, and it'll give me an elevation profile so I can look at what the pipeline would be like on the ground, because it'll give you these pretty high accurate metrics here all the way down the line that you drew. So it's kind of a cool tool to use, cool tool to play around with here, because it really gives you this elevation profile, which I really like. And then on that, you can save this or you can clear it. I'm going to clear it for now. And then with that being said, Google Earth Pro also allows you to look at your landscape with a 3D perspective. And to do this, you can zoom in, and you have to kind of do it with your mouse here. But this can give you an idea of some of the features and how they are on the ground when you're planning out new areas, or planning out new things to do, new infrastructure projects. So I kind of like using this 3D tool as well. It just gives you another perspective of what's on the ground. And we're in eastern Montana, so we've got a lot of flatlands out here, but in this prairie pothole world, it can kind of give you some cool insights. The next thing that I want to talk about is the historical imagery tool. So Google Earth Pro has a kind of an inventory of old imagery, and you can turn that old imagery on by clicking this icon, this clock icon, and this will show historical imagery and give you a slider to move through some of the imagery. And it goes all the way back to 1985, and these tick marks here show when there's imagery for this area. So I'm going to go back, let's say, to the 90s here, 1997, and you can see images, historical images of the landscape from different time frames. So I like to look at this tool often when I'm in Google Earth Pro. The other thing that is kind of neat about Google Earth Pro is that you can print maps and save maps. So unlike Google My Maps, in order to print a map, you kind of have to take a screenshot. But here there's a print option in Google Earth Pro. So there's a print icon here. Hit this print icon, you can label your map, and then it'll give you a legend, a north arrow, and a scale bar. And then you can save this as a PDF, or you can print it off, and you can put it in your file system if you need to. And then there's some other map options on here if you want to take the legend or the scale bar off or something like that. So anyways, that's the print option in Google Earth Pro. And the next thing that we're going to talk about is how to export these layers as KMLs and save them into your file system. So similar to Google My Maps, you can export your layers as KMLs. To do this, you want to highlight the layer that you are going to export, and you're going to right click and click Save Place As. What this will do is it'll take you to your file system on your local device, and I'm just going to put this into the Homestead Map Data folder that I have here. So to do that, I'm going to click into this Homestead Map Data folder. And then you can specify if you want to save your file type as a KMZ or a KML. I'm going to save it as a KML because most applications take a KML over a KMZ. There's less information in KMLs in regards to the symbology or the coloring, and so some applications prefer that less symbology than the higher level, which is a KMZ. So then I'm just going to click Save here, and that'll save it to my file system. And then I had somebody ask me in the last session of Mapping with Maida how you can import a shapefile into these applications, so we're going to go over that really quick. To import a shapefile into Google Earth Pro, it needs to be a smaller shapefile, so it can't be county level data or something like that. It needs to be a smaller shapefile, and to do that, you go up to your File tab at the top of Google Earth Pro, and then you can click this Import button, and this will take you to your file system again, and I'm just gonna shortcut here. And then I have this little Mesic area that is a shapefile, and I'm going to click into that. And you have to make sure that you're down here, that you're telling Google Earth Pro what type of file it needs to be looking for. And Google Earth Pro needs to be looking for this Esri shapefile, so it's this .shp here. And you can click into this, and then it'll recognize that it's looking for that Mesic shapefile. So I'm going to click this Mesic shapefile here. I'm going to click Open, and then it'll ask you if you want to apply a style template to the feature you just imported, and you can say yes to that if you would like. And then you can just say okay. Okay. You can also say no to that too. And then what it'll do is it'll import that shapefile, and you have to select it on here. And then there's that shape, that Esri shapefile imported into Google Earth Pro. So that's a little bit of an overview of exporting your KML layers, and then also importing shapefiles into Google Earth Pro. Now that we've wrapped up our tutorial of Google Earth Pro, we're going to jump into how we can import the layers that we made in Google Earth Pro and Google My Maps into other applications. So specifically, we're going to be looking at how you can import the maps you make in Google applications into the Rangeland Analysis Platform, StockSmart, and Onyx Hunt. And let's take a look at how we can do this using the web browser that I'm going to open here. So I've got the RAP Production Explorer pulled up, and like we did in session 1 with Mapping with Maida, we drew a feature, but instead of drawing a feature, let's upload a shapefile or a KML since we have those files now. So you can go to Choose File, click Browse, and what this is going to do is it's going to take you to your file system, open up your file system, and I'm going to import this pastures layer. And it'll import all of your pastures in here, and then you'll easily have your pastures that you don't need to redraw whenever you come into this application. And I can analyze one of these super easily by clicking on my pasture and then calculating my time series. And you can run through this stocking rate tool just the same as when we went over and mapping one with Maida. So give us our current year production for this little piece that we drew. Next thing we're going to talk about is StockSmart. So I'm logged into StockSmart here, and I'm going to start a new project, and I'm going to import those KMLs that I have created. So I'm going to title this Homestead, and I'm going to start a new project. And it's going to ask you to upload your pastures, and instead of drawing it, we're going to upload it. And to do this, we're going to have to drag and drop our files from our file system. So I'm going to drag my pastures and drop it into this file. And then I'm going to click upload. And in our pastures layer, we named all of our pastures, and I want to keep those names in StockSmart. So I'm going to click this name under the attributes, so it will name the shapes. And then those will show up on our map interface here. And then I'm also going to want to add some water. Or add those tanks that I drew. So I'm going to click this upload button again. And I'm going to open my file system here. And I'm going to import my tanks, my KMLs. And then I'm going to hit upload here again. And I want to keep the names of my tanks in here, and so then those names of my tanks will pop up as well. And then I can click add shapes, and then I can do the same process again to get those stocking rate information from these parcels. It's super nice because you don't have to redraw them. The other application a lot of folks use is Onyx Hunt, and Onyx is great because it gives you ownership information. And then you can draw points, lines, and polygons, but instead of drawing points, lines, and polygons on this whole interface, you can just import the KMLs that you already created. And to do this, you're going to want to have to drag and drop your files again. So I'm going to import my pastures, my KML pastures here, and I'm going to click import. And then might take a second to load, but then it'll import all of your pastures into Onyx Hunt, and then that will show up on your phone. So you can import KMLs into Onyx on the web browser, but you can't do it on your phone. But these shapes will now show up on my phone as well. So you can do the same thing for those stock tanks if you want, or any gates information if you have those as well. We've talked about how you can import the maps you make in the Google applications into other applications such as the Rangeland Analysis Platform and Onyx. And next we're going to dive into some additional mapping resources that I personally recommend. And I'm recommending 5 mapping resources for you all to explore. And before we end our video today, I want to show you some of the resources that I specifically use, and I know that some of the producers in our eastern Montana area use. And since I work in Montana, a lot of these resources I'll be showing are state managed, but if you're from another state, there should be a similar resource kept by your state agencies. And all these resources that I'll be showing are open source and free for the public to access. And so these links to these websites will be in the PDF learning document for Series 2 of Mapping with Maida. So we had a person ask about getting ownership information when creating their infrastructure maps, and I have a couple of recommendations in regards to that request, but the first one is Montana Cadastral website. Montana Cadastral has ownership by parcel for the entire state, and it includes a public land survey system, which the public land survey system is a mapping technique that is used to describe and subdivide land in the United States. And you can interact with the map and click on parcels, which will show you a ton of information about that parcel unit. And I really want to emphasize that this is all public information. So I'm just going to pull this up really quick so you guys can see what I'm looking at here. So if I want information for this parcel right here, I can click on this parcel and it'll update the property information in this window here. So it'll give you primary information, who the owner is, and it'll give you some different factors down here below. The next thing that I want to talk about is the Montana State Library hosts an interactive LiDAR inventory page where you can view and download high-resolution elevation maps. So LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, is a remote sensing technology that uses hundreds of thousands or even millions of pulses of light to measure distance with high accuracy. The final maps derived by LiDAR reveal Montana landscapes in ways that have previously not really been seen before, as we have elevation maps that are accurate from 4 to 10 inches tall. So this is like seeing the differences in landscape elevation change at like a Coke can level. And since we have high accuracy elevation maps for our entire state, we can find old pipelines very easily and accurately. And this is just one example that you can use LiDAR maps for. But you can see in this image that we were able to super accurately map a pipeline track that had previously been unknown. So this is the web property, and you can see that there's this pipeline that comes and snakes southwest here, and then we've got another branch of pipeline that comes off. And so the nice thing is then you can map these pipelines, and it's super accurate, even if you didn't have somebody who came out and surveyed them at the time you were mapping these pipelines, or when you were digging and putting these pipelines into the ground. The next resource that I want to talk about is the DNRC's Water Right Query System. And the Montana Department of Natural Resource Conservation Service, or the DNRC, has a public portal for searching and accessing detailed information about the state's water rights. This online portal allows you to navigate through the map interface and find water right numbers, owners, locations, and documents. I find this mapping tool super helpful for information on wells in particular, such as the information in this database gives you information on a well's depth or its enforceable priority date. And the enforceable priority date is the date when the water right claim was being submitted, and then the enforceable date became the last moment of the last date for water right claims. So this really just gives you information about how old a well is. The last, or second to last, tool that I want to recommend is a federal agency tool. So this is throughout the entire western part of the state, but the BLM General Land Office Records website provides online access to federal land records for the public land states, which are states that were created out of the public domain. And you can search patents or homestead patents by location, name, or land description. And this website can give you historical homestead context. The next thing that I want to talk about is the Working Lands for Wildlife's Landscape Explorer, which allows you to compare historic imagery to present-day satellite imagery. And this is a little bit better than that Google Earth Pro historical imagery that I showed you guys. And this imagery can be specifically helpful when you're looking at resource concerns such as woody encroachment, cropland expansion, and urbanization. So there are a bunch of images taken of the U.S. and Montana specifically in the 50s, and these images have then been digitized and put onto a map. And I want you guys to pay attention to the area right of the river, so this area right here. This is in the Blackfoot area in Montana. So that was the image from the 50s, and then this is the image now. I'm going to go back and we can look at it once again. Take a look at this area right here. So the Landscape Explorer can be great for assessing different resource concerns, and their interactive website really allows you to swipe back and forth between current and historical imagery so you can see how the landscape has changed over time. And those are all of the additional mapping tools that I have for you guys. And we are going to wrap up our presentation today. So we've gone over all of the stuff that we wanted to talk about today, and I'm going to put a little pin in for Mapping with Maida Series 3 as a reminder. That's happening January 20th, 2026, and it's going to be an open session, so come with your questions, and hopefully I'll be there to provide answers. And as a reminder, I want you guys to fill out, if you didn't get a chance, the feedback forms. It really helps us to make series like these better and more tailored to any needs that were not covered, or give me ideas of where concepts need more clarification, honestly, especially since this is RSA's first virtual classroom. And so I appreciate all of you guys signing up for this class, and hopefully we will see you at Mapping with Maida Series 2. And thank you for joining me to watch this video today. At the Rancher Stewardship Alliance, we really believe that ranching, conservation, and rural communities add up to a winning team. Thank you all for joining me for this video today.